Hanaina ora to you. I'm Binz, and we've reached video 28 in the Ælis tutorial series. Now, 20 videos ago we spoke about the name symbols, or re symbols, of the Ælis language. There's not much I can add to what was said in video 8, however, I'd like to stick slightly in theme as we'll be talking about punctuation today. Not just any punctuation, but more specifically apostrophes. I'd like to address a question that I've gotten many times by people that get in touch with Ælis for the first time. What's up with all the apostrophes in Ælis? Indeed, when you see the transcription of any Ælis text in Latin letters, what is called the romanization to be precise, there is an abundance of apostrophes that interlace practically every single word. Well, despair no more. Today, we'll dig into what motivated me to romanize Ælis like this. The underlying problem with transcribing Ælis words, sentences, and texts in our own alphabet lies in the fact that Ælis, which is the name of Ælis' own writing system, is syllabic in nature, while our Latin alphabet isn't. This is the reason that the Ælis script has been devised in the first place. The Ælis script allows you to see which components a compound word consists of. For example, ha, nai, na, ora. The alternation of the primary and secondary case letters tells you which of the letters belong together and which don't. This is visually enhanced by the very design of the letters. Not regarding the liska, you can see that this word consists of 4 syllables. And each of these syllables is a proper root word with an assigned meaning. This way, you can understand what you read. So the problem with romanizing Ælis, if you just transpose each letter one-on-one, is that the purpose of the syllabic writing system is lost, and that can be problematic. For example, look at this word. It consists of 6 letters. This word could be made up of 2 root words, goe and deo. If so, then this is what the word in Ælis looks like. Goe means water, and deo means air. This word, airy water, could for example be understood to mean oxygen-rich water in the proper context. But on the other hand, this 6-letter word could also consist of 3 parts instead, go, ed, and eo. In that case, we'd write it in Egen Ælis like this. Go means nature, eo means life or existence, and ed doesn't currently have a meaning. As the language expands though, ed might as well mean something in the future. And so, the word go ed eo would mean existential, something, nature. If we just write all the letters down, we have no means to understand where the separations lie, and therefore we don't know what we're reading if we just have the romanization to go off. If we take a larger example, why not the Lord's Prayer we analyzed in the previous video, and decide to write everything together like we would in Egen Ælis, then we could start reading lae, teu, ei, rae, and so on. We might as well read la, et, eu, ei, etc. So I felt like I needed a way of romanizing Ælis properly, in a way that informs the reader about the syllabic structure, just like Egen Ælis does. Several methods came to mind. The first method I considered worked with uppercase and lowercase letters. This is ultimately how the very Ælis font works if you type it in your text editor, like I do to create these videos. If you type a lowercase letter a, then the output is a primary case letter aie. If you type a capital letter A, then the outcome is a secondary case aio. So in order to get, for example, this output, the word malo again, what you type in your text editor actually looks like this. Right? So a first romanization method I considered just mimics this behavior. If, for example, we capitalize every root word, then the romanized Lord's Prayer looks like this. Look at it. It looks horrendous. Like 14-year-old schoolboys and girls that just discovered chat and private messaging and try to act cool. I mean, this romanization would be functional in terms of telling you which the syllables are, but it just looks like a mess. Plus, it's just hard to read. So no, this idea was quickly off the table. A second candidate was just using white spaces between all the root words. Ah, that's so much better. La, ete, ue, ira, ea, io, an, ea, na, ora, etc. There's nothing bad to say about this romanization. It looks clean, it looks transparent, it's easy to read, simple to type, and it fulfills its purpose of telling you how the letters belong together in which syllables splendidly. Except, I don't like it. Something bothers me about this. See, one of the core ideas on which the Ælis language is built is the idea of taking little bits and pieces and putting them together, like Lego blocks or puzzle pieces. And this romanization just doesn't convey that. Now, obviously, this is my personal take on the matter. Perhaps you would have preferred this romanization over the one with the apostrophes that I turned out to like best, and there's nothing wrong with that, to each their own. On the other hand, I am the spiritual father of the Ælis project, so I feel like I can do what I like best. Fair enough, right? The current standard romanization reflects the fact that Ælis works with supermassive compound words a lot better, and it also does its job of telling you which letters belong to which root words. La, ete, ue, ira, ea, and so on. But if you look closer, you also see passages where root words aren't separated by apostrophes, like this one consisting of 3 root words, an, ea, and na. There are plenty of other spots where different root words aren't separated by apostrophes. So what's going on? How does it work exactly? Well, for any romanization you encounter that doesn't have any apostrophes in it, you may safely assume that all of its root words consist of 2 letters. Like in this example, it would be te, ne, la, ni, ku, dai, ro. This word is total gibberish, by the way, but that's beside the point. If you have a passage that doesn't contain any apostrophe, then the root words are grouped in 2 letters each. If the number of letters in a word is odd, then the only possibility is that the very last root word in the string consists of 3 letters. Otherwise, an apostrophe is needed at least once, but we will get to that. So what are the rules? Let's look at the romanization of the Lord's Prayer again. The first rule is that an apostrophe is placed before every liska. That means that we'll need an apostrophe here, 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 and here. The rule states that we need an apostrophe before every liska. So in a word with 2 adjacent liska, for example, we'll put an apostrophe before each of them. Secondly, an apostrophe is placed after every 3-letter root word. There aren't any of those words in the Lord's Prayer, but this rule is the reason that we need an apostrophe, for example, in the word liska. I apologize for all the times I've transcribed the word liska and forgot to put the apostrophe in there. It should be there, right? The third rule puts an apostrophe after the first root word that immediately follows a liska. And boy, are there a lot of them. Here are all the liska in the prayer, and these are the root words that immediately follow them. We place an apostrophe behind every single one. There. Finally, an apostrophe is placed between all vowels that belong to different root words. These are considered to be clashing vowels, and the apostrophe is there to ensure that you don't read them as a diphthong. So we'll mark all of the instances we find in the prayer and put an apostrophe there as well. There we go. That's it for the apostrophe rules, but we're not there yet. For the purpose of readability, I decided to devise a few rules for using white space as well. Even though Ælis uses no white space, the romanization just looks a bit better that way, in my opinion. Firstly, we put a space in front of every function marker. These are ha, ya, la, and ir. Boop, boop, and boop. Secondly, a space is placed before every closing sentence bracket, iai, as well as behind every opening sentence bracket, lai. Like so. Finally, we put a space before and after every separator marker, ta. We have a few of those as well, So, there we go. The following rules are pretty self-evident, I think, but I'll mention them anyway because I like to be thorough. They deal with decluttering the romanization. Firstly, there is no need to have 2 apostrophes in a row. Wherever the rule set would create 2 adjacent apostrophes, they're simplified to just 1. Like so. The second step is that there's no added value to having an adjacent space and apostrophe either, so wherever that happens, it is simplified to 1 space instead. Thirdly, this is the most obvious one, there is no need to have 2 adjacent white spaces, so those are whittled down to 1 as well. The rule set has created a few instances in our example, but they're all at the end of a line, so you don't see the difference. The last step is also pretty evident. There is no need to start or end a line with an apostrophe or space either, so we'll kick those out as well. And there we have it. That's our romanization. Now, optionally, additional spaces or apostrophes may be placed in front of any of the partition markers M, vai, lo, li, yo, and yi, if the writer feels that it would increase readability. So let's single them out and put a space in front of them. And this is what it would look like. But it's optional. The writer decides what the threshold for readability exactly is. Something else I'd like to discuss while we're at it is the use of capital letters in the romanization. There are no rules for using uppercase and lowercase letters, but as a habit I myself use lowercase letters only. But using uppercase poses no problem either. If for some messed up reason the writer would like to use scrambled uppercase and lowercase letters in a romanization, then this would also be allowed. I wouldn't be a fan because frankly I think it's ugly, but hey, who am I to spoil your fun? By the way, if you ever feel like writing some Ælis text in the Latin alphabet, you may stumble across another issue, the I character. Not everyone has access to it at all times, or perhaps you don't know how to make it on your computer or phone. In that case, it's allowed to replace it with the letter Y instead. Since the letter Y isn't needed anywhere else in the romanization, using Y instead of the AE ligature is perfectly fine. Furthermore, I use the letter U with the little arch below it to transcribe the upper range liska. Why? Because I think it looks nice, that's the only reason. Note, however, that the arch does have a function. In the romanization, it helps distinguish between liska and regular root words, like for example the combination of the letters U and E, which could otherwise be either the liska for 7 or the root word for family. To avoid this issue, if you're having trouble getting the arch below the letter U, you may opt to replace it with UW instead. Or even just W also works. This is an equally valid romanization. One last thing I'd like to address before I let you get on your merry way is a question I got the other day. I was asked, when I see a romanization and want to write the word in egen Ælis, then how do I know when to use liska and when to use regular letters? Excellent question. Let's look at an example word, aitai. It could be written 3 ways. Is it one 3-letter root word with only regular letters? Is the last I a liska and the other 2 are regular letters? Or is the first I a liska and the latter 2 are regular letters? Let's look at the middle option first. If the last letter were a liska, then the romanization would require us to put an apostrophe in front of it. If there's no apostrophe in a cluster like aitai, then the second candidate is out of the league. That leaves only 2 contenders. To know the winner, you need to know that there's only a limited number of letter combinations that can form a valid root word in Ælis. More specifically, there are 5. Consonant-vowel, like for example pe, fish. Vowel-consonant, like for example is, which means consequence. Vowel-vowel, like for example oi, dynamics. Consonant-vowel-consonant, like for example tin, which means nail or claw. And finally, consonant-vowel-vowel, like for example fui, which can mean anything from a bulge or bump to a hill, ridge, or even mountain, or also convex. These are the only valid syllables of regular Ælis root words, and none of the 3-letter root words can start with a vowel. This means that a cluster such as aitai cannot be a regular 3-letter root word. This excludes the first possibility as well. If a romanized 3-letter cluster starts with a vowel, then this vowel must be a liska. There is no other way. And with that, we can finally conclude another video that turned out to be a lot longer than I had anticipated. I'm sorry about that, I get carried away sometimes. Ah well, what can you do? Na ora people, thanks for watching. See you soon. Cheerio!